Hello there everybody, welcome back to another video, and today we are going to talk about search params in Next.js 14 and how you can use them effectively. So without wasting any time, I'm going to show you what we are going to build today. If we look at the screen, so this is the basic app that we are going to build, and all I want to show is the demo of how you can use search params in here. So for example, we have these tabs. So we have gallery, we go to members, we go to settings, and you see at the top in the URL we see the search params changing. So we are on the tab settings, and if we refresh, we are still on settings, unlike normally we are on gallery, which is the default tab. Now if I were to go ahead and search something here, for example, let's just say max programming, and that's going to update the search params with whatever we are searching, and we can also show it right over here. So if you have something like to filter out stuff, we can use this search params as well. So if I want to, let's say, share this to someone, and someone goes ahead and visits this page, and let me refresh a couple of times, you still see we have this value pre-filled over here. That's because of this. And we're going to see how to do all of this inside of shadcn UI. So it's going to be a lot more fun to see. So to begin with, we have a simple Next.js app over here with shadcn UI set up. Now, if you don't know what shadcn UI is, it's basically sort of a component library that you can basically go ahead and install. So what you have to do is, if you set it up, you can just go ahead and, let's say you want to add this button. So you just run this command npx shadcn UI add button, and all that's going to do is it's going to just add a button component inside of your file system, not in your node module. So it's not going to install a package, but it will add a button inside of your file system. So we added two components. We added tabs. So this is how the tabs look like, and we added the input component. So this is how the input looks like. So going back, we have this tabs component and we have this input component, which is what we don't want to touch now. So the home page is empty. The first change that I would like to make is go to layout.tsx, and inside of here in the HTML, I'm just going to add a class name of dark. So what this will essentially do is it will tell Tailwind to set a dark mode, and that way shadcn UI is also going to be dark mode by default. So if we go to the home page, it's completely empty, but it's dark mode. So that's our first progress. Now let's go right over here, and we are going to add the tabs. So in this div, I'm going to add the class of container, and then I'll say max width is going to be screen LG. So that will just reduce the width a little bit, and then I'll just say margin top 5. So that's our div. Now I will have just this h1 that just says search params with some styles. So this is how the page looks like. Now let's add the tabs. So right over here, we could just go ahead and say tabs, right? So that will import the tabs from components UI tabs. Let's just do that, and we can set the default value. So let's just set the default value to gallery for now, because this is going to be one of our tabs. Then we have the tabs list component, and let's add the tab trigger component, tabs trigger, and the first one is going to be gallery, and we have to set the value. So the value here is going to be gallery. So this is our first tab. Now let's just copy and paste this same tab 2 more times. This one is going to be messages. Let's add messages over here, and this one is going to be settings. So let's add settings over here. Let's hit save. Going back to the app, we get these 3 tabs. Perfect. Now to add some styling, we could just go ahead and say class name width full to the tabs list, and then also for each one of these we could just go ahead and do the same thing. So let me just copy this, and width full, width full, width full. Perfect. So this is how the tabs look like as expected. So now below the tabs list, we can have the tabs content, which will essentially just hold the tab content. For the gallery, I'm just going to call it gallery, just this, and we need the value to be gallery. So this will basically show in the first tab. So if the first tab is focused, it will show this value. And let's actually go ahead and wrap this inside of an h2 tag with all the stylings. So I'll just go ahead and say gallery like this, so that it looks a little bit better. All we have is text center 2xl font semi-bold. Going back, we have gallery here, and in messages settings we have nothing. So let's add those, and to add those we could just again copy and paste the same thing. So for this one we have messages, and we are just going to show the text of messages. And for this one we have settings, and we're going to just show the text of settings, nothing else. Going back, we have messages, settings, and gallery. Perfect. Now if I were to go ahead and click on messages, and if I refresh, I go back to gallery. That's because this is the default value. If we go back over here, we have the default value set to gallery. So how do we make it that if I want to be focused on another tab, let's say settings, by default, how do we do that? We can actually do that using query params. So if I were to just say question mark tab equals to settings. So we want to catch this query parameter, and whenever this is the case, we want to set this as the default one. So let's go ahead and create an interface. So I'll just say interface. I'm going to call this home props. Now if you are not using TypeScript, if this is JSX for you, not TSX, then you can just skip this part. Right over here, interface home props, we can just add search params. Now this is what Next.js gives us. This is going to be the object which will contain all the search params. So let's go ahead and type this out as the tab. So the tab is going to be of type string. Now this, again, this can be optional as well. What I mean is, if for example there is nothing in the URL like this, so this tab is actually going to be nothing. It's not going to exist. So the search params will be an empty object. So we can make this optional using just a question mark here. So we have added this tab. Now let's go ahead and destructure the props. We could just say home props and we get back the search params. All right. So if I were to go ahead and console.log search params right over here, what you will notice is I'll open this console up and we get an empty object, and we also get the preview right over here using the console ninja VS Code extension, but I'm still going to show it right over here. So we get this empty object because we don't have anything inside of our search params. So if I were to go ahead and say, let's say tab equals settings, going back to the editor, we get tab settings. If I were to make this like, let's say ABCD, whatever, is going to be the same thing, ABCD. Now we want to get the current tab. So let's just remove this and let's say let current tab is going to be search params dot tab. All right. So this will be either string or undefined. But what if it is undefined? What if there is nothing in here? Well, in that case, we could just go ahead and say we can use the nullish coalescing operator and we can set it to gallery. So what we are not changing this part over here. Remember, we are only changing the value of this variable. So if this by any chance is undefined, we set this to gallery. So now let me just console.log current tab. Let's hit save. So we get ABCD here. That's because we have tab equals ABCD. If I make this, let's say settings, we go back, this is settings. If I remove this, now we should have gallery. And here we go, we have gallery because we set this as the default value if this is undefined. Now what we can do is we could just use this current tab. So I'm just going to use a dynamic value in the default value right over here. Tab's default value is going to be current tab. Hit save and let's see. So right now we have nothing. So the default tab is this one. If I were to change this to, let's say tab equals settings, you see settings is focused. If I change this to messages, now messages is focused. But what if I change this to something weird? All right. You see no tab is focused, but by default we want gallery to be focused. In that case, what we can do is we can use if else. So let me just change this out. So if, let's just add a condition, if current tab is not equal to messages, meaning if it is not messages, and if current tab is not equal to settings, right? So if it is neither messages nor settings, if it is some other gibberish or something else, all we need to do is just set the current tab to gallery. So if it is anything else, anything other than messages or settings, we just set it to gallery, and that way the default value becomes gallery. Let me show you a demo. So right now we have this weird spelling of messages over here. If I refresh, you see gallery is focused by default because whatever you put here doesn't matter except if it's settings, we get settings. Now if I were to remove this S from here, we get gallery back again. Perfect. So that's how you have the basic usage of search params. But hey, what if I want to change this search param whenever I click on any of these? So if I want to, let's say, go to messages, but this does not change, we can easily do that by just making this a link component by Next.js. So what we can do is let's just go ahead and let's do the messages first. So inside of tab's trigger, let's just go ahead and add a link component by Next.js. So this is imported from next/link, and let's just set the href to, I'm just going to set the href to an object. I'll explain why. And inside of this, let's create an object. Actually, this is not an object. This is the dynamic JavaScript part. This is the object. And in this object, I'm just going to set the query property, and inside the query object, query property, this is also going to be an object. So let me expand this to make it a little bit more clear. So we are passing in an object. In this object we have query, which is another object, and we can just set the tab right over here to messages. Normally we can pass in href equals to, let's say, slash something or slash we can do something like this, tab equals messages. But this is not the right way. I think this works, but I don't think this is the right way if you want to handle something like search params. So we can just pass in an object like this, and we just set the query tab to messages. Let's try it out. So if I were to go ahead and click on this, see, we get messages here, but there is one problem. What if I click on here? Well, nothing changes, right? On except the text, right? So the text works. So in this case, we are using shadcn tabs trigger. So what we can do is we could just make this as child. What it will do is it will swap the tab trigger, which is the default component, with the link. Now this whole thing becomes a link. So if I click anywhere right over here, so if let's just remove this. If I click on here, you see this becomes messages. All right, so let's do the same thing with settings right over here. We could just copy this whole link. Let's paste this. Let's close this out. But this time this query tab is going to be settings. So let's do that, settings. And let's make this as child again. So now if let's click here, you see it changes to settings. If I click here, it changes to messages. If I click here, nothing changes, but we also want that to change. So let's copy this. Go right over here to gallery, and I'm just going to go to gallery, but this time we don't want anything in the tab, right? But we cannot outright remove this tab query param. So what we are going to do is just set this to gallery. It does not matter what we set. We can even set this to XYZ. Nothing really matters over here, but we are using gallery for readability purposes. So now if I click on gallery, I forgot to add the as child prop. So let's add as child over here. Go back. If I click on gallery, this changes back to gallery. Messages, settings works smoothly. If I refresh, now we are on messages. If I go to settings and refresh, now we are on settings. Perfect. Now that's it with the tabs thingy. But what about the search bar that I showed you? For the search bar, we need to create a separate client component that will hold the input. So let's go right over here inside the components folder that we already have. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it search bar.tsx, right? The first step I'm going to do is set this to use client, because we are going to use some hooks inside of this one. Now I'm just going to say export function search bar. Let's just say search bar, and let's just return nothing but just an input from here. And I'm just going to have a placeholder search title here. Now let's go to page.tsx, and just after this h1, I'm just going to use this one. So search bar, this will automatically import it from components search bar. So let's hit save. Let's go back. We have this right over here. Let's add some styling. Let's go over here in the input, and I'm just going to add a class name of margin y5. So that adds some spacing in between. Perfect. Now let me show you what hooks we are going to use. First, right off the bat, we are going to use the hooks provided by Next.js, which is use router, use path name, and use search params. So we can just go right over here and let's say const router equals to use router, which comes from next navigation, not next router. So let's invoke this hook. Then we got const path name equals to use path name. This way we get the path name, which is basically the current path, whatever comes after or whatever comes after slash, right? So if it's slash, not the query params, but slash, if you have, let's say, a big path, slash blog, slash post, whatever, this is called the path name. So we get the path name, and let's just say const search params is going to be equal to use search params. So we need these three hooks as the base. Now what I want is that whenever I type something right over here, this should update the search params right over here and should add another query parameter, which is title equals to whatever, right? Whatever I type in the input. So this should be the search params after I type anything in this input. We can easily do that using the on change event listener. So let's just say on change is equal to, I'm just going to call this handle search title. Okay. Now this function is not made yet, but I'm just going to add the event right over here. So we get the event. If you know React, you know what I mean. We get the event here, and inside of this function, I'm just going to pass in e.target.value. Right. So in this function, we are going to take in the value of the input. So let's just go ahead and create this function handle search title. It's going to take in the value, which should be of type string. If you're not using TypeScript, you can just omit this part, type string, whatever that is. All right, so we get the value which should be of type string. Everything is perfect. Let's just console.log to confirm. So we're going to console log the value. Let's go ahead and inspect, go to the console, and I'm just going to type in anything like, let's say max. You see we get M, MA and MAX. Perfect. So it works. Now what we want is this search params to change, right? This search params that comes from use search params is read only. If you were to hover over this, you get read only URL search params. So we cannot exactly modify this. We have to change the route. Just like when we click on something, right, we have the link component that changes the route. Similarly, we have to change the route. For that we use the router. So we get the search params. Now these are read only. So how do we change them, right? What we can do is we can make another search params. So let's just name this const sp. You can name it anything you want. Sp is sort of a convention. Sp is equal to new URL search params, which is a default constructor. You don't need to import it or anything. And we can pass in these default search params in here. So all this will do is it will copy all these search params, and now you can write them inside of here. What we can do is we could just say sp.set, and we can set a search param. We can set the title search param. So we want right over here, we want it to be title equals to something. So we can just say set the title. We want to set the title search param, which basically means after the URL, I want to have title is equal to whatever the input is. So the value, we get the value from here on change e.target.value. We get the value. We can set the title to the value that we get from this function. So we set this, but we are still not using this search param anywhere else. We are changing this, but we are not using it. So what we can do is we can just say router.push. So we can use the router.push. In the href, we can pass in string template like this. We have backticks, and what we do is we put path name over here, which is, as I said, it's going to be slash or slash blog or whatever you have. It's going to be the path name, and let's add a question mark, and then let's add sp, which is the modified search params. Now this is not a string, this is a URL search param. So we have to convert it to string with .toString. So what this will do is it will set the title to the value, and it will say, well, hey, what's the path name? In our case, it's slash. So it's going to say slash, and then it's going to add a question mark. Then it's going to say sp.toString, which will make it title equals to anything, for example value, whatever I type in there. So this is what it will become. And if we already have some search params, which in this case we have tab equals gallery, so what it will do is it will take the already tab equals gallery, it will add the ampersand and title equals value. Essentially what it does is it just adds another search param, which is title, and if title already exists, it's going to just change it. Let's see it in action. So we go right over here. I'm just going to clear out all search params for you, and let's just go ahead and type in, let's say, hello world. You see, instantly we update the search params, hello plus world. Perfect, exactly what we want. But what if I click on the messages tab? You see that search param goes away. How do we prevent that from happening? Well, if you remember, inside of the page.tsx, we get all the search params. So even though we are just typing out one, we still get all of them. Let me just console.log search params right over here. Hit save. You see we got tab messages. If I were to, let's say, let me just remove this, we get nothing as an empty object right now. But if I say hello, we get title hello, and like whatever the title was. What we can do is we can add a title, which will again be optional, of type string. All right, let's get rid of this. Now what we can do is when we are changing this, when we click on a link, all we do is we modify the query with whatever the tab is. But what we actually need to do is we also need to get the previous title. So if there is already some search params, we just want to place it right over here. What we can do is we could just go inside of the query object, and we can use the spread operator. All right, and we can just say search params. Let's add a comma. What this will do is it will spread the existing search params, which is in our case a title, right? If we're going to set that to whatever the title was. So it's going to just spread out the whole object and then add the tab gallery or modify the tab gallery. Let me show you an example. So right over here we have title hello, and now if I were to click on this, you see this title hello stays, and then we get tab gallery. But this is not the same case with messages and settings, right? We can just copy over this same logic in here and in here, as simple as that. Now let's get rid of all of this. Let's say it's going to be Max programming, right? So we get the title. If I go to the messages tab, it still remains. Now whatever we type in here, I want to show in any of these tabs. And remember, we get the search params, and these are all the search params. So what I can do is let's just go ahead and create a variable. I'll just say const title is going to be search params dot title. Let's go down, and inside of the content, I'm just going to say gallery title, messages title, and settings title. This is just a demonstration to show you that we can access these search params wherever we want. So it's like a global state that we can use. All right, so you see we get Max programming. If I were to just remove programming, we get only Max. Perfect. If I were to go to messages, settings, it still works as it is. But what if I remove this? Well, you see, we still get title equals to, but it's equal to nothing. What we can essentially do is go back to search bar, and we can check, well, hey, if but somehow this is empty, we just want to delete this title search param. Let's just say if value is equal to an empty string, we can just do sp.delete. Again, a helper method that we can use, sp.delete title. As simple as that. And let's say else we want this to happen, else we want to set it. So if value is empty string, so if the user has nothing in here, then we just remove this. This will be removed. And let's also add dot trim. So what this will do is it will also handle spaces. So let's say the user types in a couple of spaces. We also want to count that as an empty string. So we can just trim the spaces out, and that's going to work as it is. Hit save. Let's go back, and I'm just going to type in something. Let's say hello, and then I'm going to clear it out. You see the title is gone. All right, so finally I'm just going to say hello. Let's hit refresh. You see we don't get title, whatever the title is in here. It's actually quite simple to do. What I can do is I can just go ahead and say default value is going to be title. Now what is this title? Well, it's actually nowhere to be found, so we can just get it from search params. Remember, this is read only. We can read from this, but we cannot write to this. So I could just go ahead and say const title is going to be search params dot get title. Now TypeScript over here throws us an error that string or null cannot be used right over here, because this also can be null. So let's just go ahead and add the nullish operator and just set it to an empty string. So if there is no title in the search params, we set it to an empty string. Hit save, go back, and it's hello. If I refresh, you see it's hello. If I were to change this to, let's say, Max, you see this is set to Max. That's basically it. That's about it with the search params, but there is one little bonus that I want to teach you, which is handling debouncing. So if you are, let's say, searching through your database, right? Whenever the user types in something, let's say you want to find John in the user's list. If you are using a database and you are querying that database whenever the user types in anything, this real-time thing can become very expensive to you. So what we can do is we can use debouncing over here, so that whenever the user types in, let's say, John, and then waits a bit, now this gets set to the query param, and then this can proceed with everything else. So for debouncing, we can actually go ahead and use a library. So I'm just going to quick open my terminal. Let's go right over here. And I'm just going to say npm install use hooks -ts. Now, if you're using npm, just use npm install yarn, then yarn add yarn install. I use pnpm. So we got use hooks ts. Now, use hooks ts is nothing but a huge library of hooks, huge collection of hooks. There are so many useful hooks that you can use. We are going to use the use debounce callback hook. So how do we actually use it? What we can do is let's go right over here where we have all these hooks, and I'm going to add another hook. I'm just going to say const debounced title is going to be use debounce, and we don't get any IntelliSense, but we are still going to import it this way. So let's import something from use hooks ts. So we are going to import the use debounce callback. We also have used debounce, which is going to be deprecated soon enough. So we are going to use the latest one, which is use debounce callback. Don't worry, I'll explain you what it means. So we got use debounce callback, and right over here we have to pass in the function that updates this title. In our case, what we do is we update the search params, right? We do not have set state, we do not have use state anywhere. All we are doing is we are modifying the search params. So what we can do is we could just pass in this function. So right over here we call this function right over here inside of on change. Instead of on change, we're going to give use debounce callback this function. So this by itself is going to call handle search title, and we can set the delay, which is 500 by default, 500 millisecond, which is half a second. So if a user types and stops for 500 milliseconds, we then run this function. So basically it will wait for the user to stop, and when the user stops, it will wait for 500 milliseconds, and then it will run this function. So let's just set it to 500. We're going to change it later. So we got the debounced title. Actually, I'm sorry, we don't get the debounced title here. We get the function called debounce. Let's just call this debounce. So this is basically a function that we can call instead of this handle search title. So let's just go ahead and change this with debounce, and there we go. So what this will essentially do is it will take the value which we take right over here. If I were to remove this, for example, this is going to throw an error right over here because we don't need value, but we still need it. If I, let's say, change it to of type number, this again throws an error. So it's completely type safe as well. Now, if it seems confusing, don't worry, just look at the code. What we did is essentially just we replaced the position of handle search title. Instead of calling it directly when the user types, we call it after some time. We call it after 500 milliseconds. So how do we do that? We give this function to this hook. This hook returns to us a debounced function, a function that basically waits for some time, and we call the debounce function over here. Hit save, and let's go back. So I'm just going to clear out all these search params. Now I'm going to say John. You see, it took some time, right? There was a wait, and then it put all the John. So it's not like JOHN. It waits for the whole thing to finish. If I say do, it waits for that. If I clear it out, again it waits. If I were to crank this up to, let's say, 5000 milliseconds, it's going to wait for 5 seconds, but we don't want that. So let's just make it 2 seconds for now. So I'll just say, let's say John, John, it'll wait 2 seconds, and then it will do its job. Normally 500 is the good way to put it, but if you have some requirements, you can always change it to 2 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever. I hope this video helped you out. If you want all of this code, it will be on a GitHub repository. I'll leave the link in the description below. If you have any suggestions for me, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions about this, if you don't understand anything, ask it in the comments. I will help, or somebody else will help. Like it, share it with others. Let me know what other content you want. Finally, thanks for watching.